On November 18th, 1978, in a remote jungle clearing in Guyana, South America, one of the most shocking tragedies in modern history unfolded. Over 900 Americans died in a mass murder-suicide event that would become known as the Jonestown Massacre. The victims were members of People's Temple, a religious movement founded and led by Jim Jones, a charismatic preacher who had transformed from a social justice advocate into one of history's most destructive cult leaders. The events at Jonestown represent the culmination of years of psychological manipulation, coercion, and the systematic breakdown of individual autonomy through sophisticated methods of mind control. The roots of this tragedy stretch back to Indianapolis in the 1950s, where Jones established People's Temple as an integrationist church promoting racial equality, communal living, and social justice. From these seemingly noble beginnings, Jones gradually constructed an organization built around his personality and increasingly apocalyptic worldview. Understanding how Jones transformed a progressive religious movement into a death cult requires examining the sophisticated techniques of manipulation he employed over more than 2 decades. Central to Jones's control system was his exceptional charisma and oratorical skill. Former members frequently describe his ability to captivate audiences with passionate sermons that could last for hours. Jones possessed an intuitive understanding of his followers' emotional needs and vulnerabilities, tailoring his message to resonate with those seeking meaning, community, and purpose. This emotional connection formed the foundation upon which he would build more coercive control mechanisms. Jones deliberately targeted marginalized populations, the poor, racial minorities, the elderly, and social activists disillusioned with American society. For Black Americans facing systematic racism, Jones offered a vision of racial harmony and dignity. For the elderly, he promised security and purpose in their final years. For idealistic activists, he presented People's Temple as the embodiment of socialist principles and social justice in action. By identifying and exploiting these legitimate desires and grievances, Jones positioned himself as the unique solution to his followers' deepest needs. The psychological dominance Jones established relied heavily on information control. As the temple grew, Jones increasingly isolated his followers from outside influences. Family relationships outside the group were discouraged or severed, labeled as connections to a corrupt and doomed society. Media was carefully filtered, with members discouraged from consuming news, except through Jones's interpretations. This information vacuum allowed Jones to construct an alternative reality, where his prophecies and paranoid worldview went unchallenged. Jones's most effective deception was presenting a public image dramatically at odds with the temple's internal reality. To outsiders, People's Temple appeared to be a progressive church engaged in admirable humanitarian work. The temple operated nursing homes, drug rehabilitation programs, and food distribution services. Jones cultivated relationships with politicians and civic leaders, including California Governor Jerry Brown, First Lady Rosalind Carter, and San Francisco Mayor George Moscone. These connections provided legitimacy and a protective shield against critics. Meanwhile, behind closed doors, Jones was instituting increasingly authoritarian practices. Former members describe a system of public humiliation, where followers were forced to confess fabricated transgressions before the congregation. Physical punishment became normalized, with members beaten for perceived infractions against temple rules. Sexual manipulation was common, with Jones engaging in sexual relations with both male and female followers, supposedly as therapy or as proof of their devotion. These practices serve to break down individual willpower and create dependency on Jones as the ultimate arbiter of morality and truth. The move to Guyana in 1977 represented the culmination of Jones's control strategy. Jonestown, the agricultural project established in the remote jungle, was sold to followers as a socialist paradise free from the racism and capitalism of the United States. In reality, it functioned as a prison camp where Jones's control could be absolute. Physical isolation made escape nearly impossible. The tropical climate, inadequate housing, and food shortages created physical hardship that further weakened resistance. Exhausting labor schedules left members too tired to think critically. Radio communications with the outside world were controlled entirely by Jones. In Jonestown, Jones's behavior became increasingly erratic, fueled by amphetamine addiction and paranoia. He would broadcast rambling addresses over the settlement's loudspeakers at all hours, depriving residents of sleep, a classic technique for reducing critical thinking capacity. These white knight drills involved waking the community with alarms and announcing that mercenaries were coming to torture and kill them. Jones would then lead loyalty tests, asking if members were ready to die for the cause. These rehearsals for death desensitized followers to the idea of mass suicide and established it as the ultimate form of revolutionary commitment. Jones manipulated language to control thought, creating what former members describe as a constantly shifting reality. He reframed suicide as revolutionary suicide, or crossing over, giving it positive connotations of political resistance and spiritual transcendence. Discipline became care, punishment became learning, and family separation became challenging privilege. This Orwellian manipulation of language made it difficult for followers to accurately name or conceptualize their own exploitation. The temple's leadership structure extended Jones's control through a network of trusted lieutenants who monitored the community for dissent. Members were encouraged to report on each other, including their own family members, creating an atmosphere of constant surveillance. This panopticon effect meant that temple members began to regulate their own thoughts and behaviors, knowing they were always potentially being watched and reported on. Through this system, Jones effectively outsourced control to the community itself. Perhaps most insidiously, Jones appropriated and undermined genuine progressive ideals. He used the language of socialism, anti-racism, and social justice to justify increasingly authoritarian control. Resistance to his leadership was characterized as counter-revolutionary or racist. This perversion of progressive politics served to neutralize the critical thinking of intelligent, socially conscious followers who might otherwise have questioned his authority. Former members have described the cognitive dissonance of recognizing Jones's abuse while believing they were part of a righteous movement fighting for equality and justice. The presence of children in Jonestown created another layer of control. Parents were separated from their children, who were raised communally. This arrangement gave Jones enormous leverage, as any parent considering escape or resistance knew their children would remain hostages. Jones explicitly threatened harm to children to ensure compliance from their parents, creating an unbearable emotional bind. As scrutiny from concerned relatives in the United States intensified, Jones prepared his final act of control. Congressman Leo Ryan's investigative visit to Jonestown in November 1978 triggered Jones's long-rehearsed endgame. When a small number of defectors chose to leave with Ryan, Jones ordered the congressman's murder at the nearby airstrip. Recognizing that this act would bring the full force of the U.S. government against him, Jones implemented the mass poison plan that the community had rehearsed multiple times. The final death scene at Jonestown, captured partially on audio tape, reveals the culmination of Jones's mind control techniques. As cyanide-laced flavor aid was distributed, Jones continues his manipulation, framing the deaths as a revolutionary act rather than what it truly was. The final victimization of people whose autonomy had been systematically broken down. Some followers embraced this framing, while others were clearly coerced. Armed guards surrounded the pavilion, and medical personnel injected poison into those who resisted. Parents were forced to poison their children first, making their own survival psychologically impossible. Jones's final recorded words continue the deception, framing mass murder as dignity and resistance. The aftermath of Jonestown prompted crucial questions about the nature of mind control and the vulnerability of even intelligent, well-intentioned people to systematic manipulation. While early analyses often pathologized People's Temple members as weak-minded or inherently gullible, modern understanding recognizes that Jones exploited universal human needs for meaning, community, and purpose. The techniques he employed, isolation, information control, fear, sleep deprivation, shifted language, and the gradual escalation of commitment, can render almost anyone vulnerable to undue influence. People's Temple began with genuine ideals of racial integration and social justice that attracted committed, idealistic members. Jones systematically corrupted these ideals, using them as tools of control rather than liberation. The tragedy of Jonestown lies not just in the final death toll, but in the perversion of human potential and goodness that preceded it. The victims were not simply brainwashed followers, but complex individuals whose trust and idealism were weaponized against them through sophisticated psychological manipulation. The legacy of Jonestown offers a sobering reminder of the dangers of unquestioned authority and the vulnerability of even democratic societies to charismatic manipulation. As survivor Deborah Layton noted, "Nobody joins a cult. You join a self-help group, a religious movement, a political organization. They change so gradually by the time you realize you're entrapped, and almost everybody does realize it, you cannot figure a safe way back out." In understanding the mechanisms of control that enabled the Jonestown tragedy, we gain crucial insights into protecting the fragile conditions of autonomy and critical thinking that underpin both individual freedom and democratic society.